G'day guys, on today's video we're going to show you how to perform a basic service on a Toyota Landcruiser 80 series, in this case a 1997 petrol 1FZFE model. First of all, I'll just explain that that's going to involve changing the engine oil, air filter and oil filter. Alright, so we'll just run through now what the tools and parts you're going to need are for this job. The first thing is we're going to need a set of spanners, specifically a 13 and a 14mm. I'm also going to recommend a set of sockets as well, in this case a 1/2 inch drive, and the reason for that is that it'll allow us to use an oil filter socket, which is going to make it much easier to get the oil filter on and off, as opposed to another option here for an oil filter tool, but I recommend against that in this case. We've also got a flathead screwdriver or something with a thin blade will do, and then I've also got a torque wrench for when it comes to torquing up our sump plug bolt as well. Over here we've got our new oil filter from Toyota, and we've also got a new gasket for the sump plug. We've also got a new air filter. In this case I've gone with a Ryco filter. I found this A340 model was needed by using the Ryco filter finder on their website. And the last component we're going to need is the engine oil itself. You're going to need 7.2 litres in this case, which will typically come as two 5-litre cans. I've chosen to use a 20W50 oil. The reason for that is that this car has quite high mileage, but I'll recommend some other oil viscosities for the car in the description as well. Over here we've got some gloves and some safety glasses as well, and a head torch. And then the last couple of things you're going to need is just some paper towel and a drain pan. In this case you're going to need a minimum 8-litre capacity for that drain pan, and then some bricks or something similar as well to allow you to chock the wheels. So what we've done first before we start is we've driven the car for about 15 minutes just to get it up to operating temperature. We're going to put it in park or in gear, and we're going to put the handbrake on, and then we're just going to chock a minimum of 2 wheels. So we'll just do that now. That's just going to make us absolutely certain that the car can't move while we're underneath there. Alright guys, so we've finished chocking those 2 wheels now. The first thing that we're going to do is drain the old engine oil. And just before we get under the car to remove that drain plug, I'm just going to loosen the engine oil filler cap on top of the engine. I'm not going to take it fully off, I'm just going to allow so that some air can flow in through there while the oil's draining so that we don't get a vacuum that stops it draining smoothly. Okay, so we're underneath the Landcruiser now, and I'll just start by showing you where we are. So this is the engine oil sump here, and this is the bolt plug that we're going to be undoing. Just for reference, this is the front axle housing along here between the 2 front wheels, and we're about 30 centimeters behind that, just to the left-hand side of the car. The tools that we're going to need for this step are we're going to need our 1/2 inch drive socket and our 14mm socket for that. We're going to need our drain pan and some paper towel just in case we have any spillages. And then we may need the flathead screwdriver as well. So in order to drain the engine oil, we're just going to need to remove the oil sump plug, which is this bolt just here. So we're just going to start by just loosening that using the socket, just getting it to a point where, there we go, I've cracked it now. So that's going to allow me to undo it by hand. And the reason I do that is just so I have a bit more control. So I'm just going to position the sump pan underneath that plug, just to make sure that captures all of the oil that's going to drain out. So I'm just going to slowly loosen this by hand. And just keep in mind that the engine oil that's going to drain out is hot because we've just driven the car. That's why I've got the gloves on, just in case any spills on my hand, but we're going to do our best to try and pull that plug away. In the worst case scenario though, you can drop it in the engine oil and retrieve it out later. So I'm just undoing that by hand, and I'll just pull that away. And there you can see my old engine oil is just going to drain. We're going to need to leave that to drain for half an hour or an hour now, just to ensure that all of the oil comes out of the engine. And we're going to go and do everything else that we need to do for the service in the meantime. Now while we're here, I'm just going to pop that plug on some paper towel. And I'm just going to use that flathead screwdriver or something with a nice thin blade on it. If you have a look up here, you'll see that the old gasket has stuck on to the housing, and that's quite common. So I'm just going to use my screwdriver just to gently push that, and there we go, that's fallen into the pan. Don't worry about that because we're going to use a new one of those later on. I've just grabbed that sump plug that we've just removed, and I'm just going to clean that up with a bit of paper towel and put it off to the side, and we'll come back and use that again at the end. So while that oil's draining, we're going to start by replacing the air filter. You can find the air filter on the driver's side of the vehicle, or the right hand side in this case. It's located inside the airbox just here. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to need to take our 13mm ring spanner, and we're just going to remove this nut at the top of the airbox. Now that that's loosened, we can just remove the nut by hand. We're just going to put that nut to the side. Then we just need to remove the two small air lines from the top of the airbox. So you're just going to gently pull those off of the airbox lid, and we're just going to put them over to the side. So we'll leave them there just off to the side. And then finally we have three small clips located equal distances around the airbox lid. So I'm just going to remove those clips now. And once those clips are removed, we should be able to just slide the top of the airbox lid off of this bolt. So I'm just going to slowly lift that up now. This particular one has a washer there as well, so I'm just going to put that off to the side as well. And that's going to allow us to access our old air filter inside the airbox. So I'm just going to remove that air filter, just lifting it up over the top of that long bolt. And then just place that back down for now. And we're just going to pop that old air filter off to the side. That's going to go in the bin, and we'll grab our new Ryco, in this case, air filter. So all we need to do is pop that new air filter back in the airbox, same way we took the old one out, over that long bolt. Keep our air lines off to the side, and we just need to line that bolt up so that it pops through the hole in the top. Just to repeat the process that we used to take it off, we just need to pop those three clips back on, pop the two air lines back on, and you'll notice they can only go one way. And now we're just going to pop the washer and nut back on. Once we've tightened that nut by hand, we're just going to grab our 13mm spanner, and we're just going to gently do that up. We're not going to torque this particular nut up, we're just going to do it nice and gentle just to hold that lid on. And that's done, we've replaced our air filter. So the next step in the service is going to be to replace the oil filter. I'll just show you quickly where that is now. So we're just over on the passenger side of the vehicle. I'm touching it now, that's our oil filter, just off to the side of the engine there. What we're going to do next is we're just going to jump underneath the car again, and we're just going to relocate our oil pan just underneath that, just so that if there is any oil that drains out of that filter, it gets captured as well. I've just grabbed a few sheets of paper towel, and I'm just going to place that underneath the oil drain pan, because I'm going to need to move that green pan over to where the oil filter is. And this is just going to capture any of the last little drips that are still falling from that oil pan. I'm just going to put this on top so it doesn't blow away. I'm just moving the oil pan across to be directly beneath the oil filter, which is just below our axle housing in between the two front wheels on the passenger side of the vehicle. I've just grabbed my 1/2-inch drive socket and an extension for it, and also my oil filter socket. We're going to need that extended length to be able to reach the oil filter where it's located on this car. I've also just grabbed a few sheets of paper towel just to have at the ready, because when we do remove this oil filter, there might be some oil that drains out of it. So we're just going to take our oil filter socket on the extension, and we're just going to push that on nice and hard, just making sure we can get it as far forward as we can onto the oil filter. And then we're just going to start to turn that counterclockwise just to loosen the oil filter. We might need to undo it about 1/2 or 3/4 of a turn. I can feel that's getting quite easy to turn now, so I'm going to remove the oil filter socket, and we're just going to remove it by hand for the rest. So you want to be careful here, because the oil filter will still be quite warm. As you remove it, some oil is going to start to drain out, but just try and hold it upright if you can so that less oil comes out of the filter. So I'm just turning that counterclockwise, and now I'm able to just hold that and remove it through the top. We're just going to put that off to the side. I've just grabbed some more paper towel, and we're just going to use that just to wipe around where that excess oil is on the engine block where the oil filter makes contact. Now that we've removed our old oil filter, we're going to take our new Toyota oil filter in this case, take it out of the box. You'll find that most oil filters will come with a plastic wrapping on top, so you just need to remove that. What we're going to do is we're going to pre-lubricate the surface of that oil filter. So I'm just going to open up the first of my 5-litre oil cans. Making sure you've got a pretty clean glove on, you're just going to take the end of your finger and stick it in the oil, and then we're just going to rub that around the edge of that rubber surface on the oil filter. And what that's going to do is it's going to mean it's not just a raw rubber surface when we go to screw it down onto the engine block. So we're going to take the new oil filter, and I'm just going to screw the female threaded part of the oil filter onto the bolt that's sticking out of the side of the engine block. So we're just going to get it started by hand, just rotating slowly the oil filter in a clockwise direction. Alright, so I can feel that's just started now, and I'm just going to rotate it by hand just until it starts to make contact with the surface that it's coming up to. Alright, so that's just started to touch now. And what we're going to do after that is we're going to take our oil filter socket tool, and we're going to rotate the oil filter another 3/4 of a turn past where it's just made contact. We're going to push the socket hard on Starting off with the socket vertical, we're going to rotate it clockwise, just keeping note of how far we've turned. So this can be a little bit tricky, but I've done about 1/8 of a turn now because I can't move very far. So if I do that again, that's now 1/4 of a turn. And we're just going to continue turning. That's a 1/2 a turn now. And there we are. So that's 3/4 of a turn. And then you can remove your oil filter socket. And that's it for installing a new oil filter. All right, the next step is that we need to put our sump plug back on. I'm just going to grab the new sump plug gasket and our old sump plug that we cleaned up earlier, and we're going to take that underneath the car and do it back up. For that, we're going to need our 14mm socket that we used earlier to remove it, and in this case we're also going to be using a torque wrench. It's not absolutely essential that you do it up to the designated torque for this plug, but it is a good idea. Just before we reinstate the sump plug bolt, I'm just going to take some paper towel and just wipe away that last little bit of oil. It's just easier to do that now before we put the bolt back in. So we're going to take the old plug with the new gasket, and we're just going to by hand tighten that up into the hole in the bottom of the engine oil sump. Once that makes contact, we're going to take our 14mm socket on our torque wrench. I've got this set to 18 foot-pounds, which is 25 Newton meters, and I'm just going to start to do up that drain plug. Might take a few turns initially just to start to squash that washer down, and we're just going to tighten until the torque wrench hits that 18 foot-pounds, and we're done. Now that we've reinstated that sump plug, it's time to put the new engine oil in. So the first step is we're just going to remove the engine oil filler cap from the top of the engine, and we're just going to put that over to the side. I'm just going to grab the first of my 5-litre engine oils. In this case, I'm using a 20W50 mineral oil, but you can use a full synthetic, and there's a few other viscosities you can use as well that I'll put in the description. We're just going to pour from the side of the can, and the reason that we do that is that then you don't get any glugging. If you try and pour with the handle at the top, you won't get a smooth flow. Alright, so we've just finished emptying that first can, so we'll just grab the next one. So onto our second can now, keeping in mind that when we know we have to put in another approximately 2.2 litres, we're going to measure that using the 500ml increments on the side of the can. So we're going to go until we have used about 2.2 litres, meaning there's about 2.8 left in the can. So we're down to about just under 3 litres. We'll put a little bit more in. Alright, so we've just finished putting in the last 2.2 litres of oil from that can. All that's left to do now is just to put the engine oil filler cap back on, and we're going to let that oil sit for about 5 minutes now just to give it time to drain down into the engine, and the last step for us will be just to verify and check the level on the dipstick. So now that that engine oil's had a few minutes to drain down into the sump, I've just taken some paper towel and we're just going to pull that oil dipstick out and wipe it off just to make sure there's no old engine oil on there. You really should do this when the engine's at operating temperature, but this is just going to give us a good idea of whether we've put enough oil in. There we go, so we can see that we've got engine oil on the stick and it's just above the full line, which is where you want it to be. The last thing we're going to do now that we've completed the service is just to dispose of our old oil. So we can just take the 5-litre jerry cans that we had, and we're just going to pour the old engine oil into there. So this is where it can be really helpful if your oil drain pan has a funnel on the end of it. And we're just going to pour all that oil into that empty can. Once you've finished draining all of the oil, you can take these old oil cans to your local auto parts store like Super Cheap Auto or Repco, and they'll quite often be able to dispose of that for you. And that's really all there is to it for performing a basic service on your Toyota Landcruiser. A great way of saving yourself some money and making sure your vehicle's looked after in the long term. If there's anything that you think we could have done better or something you'd like to see in the future, please let us know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Yay? Nay? What?